Here in the UK, you might think that we live in a democracy because, after all, we have elections and we get to vote. But that's only one side of the story. In fact, over there in the Houses of Parliament, the majority of politicians have not actually been elected. So in this video, I'm going to investigate the House of Lords. Does it still have a place in the 21st century? Or is it just a club for posh old men and rich elites?
The media have a caricature of the House of Lords. They always show the picture of the peers in their robes at the opening of Parliament.
You really couldn't make this stuff up. It belongs in the Harry Potter movie, not in the House of Parliament.
I'm on my way to meet a British politician who sat in Parliament for 48 years. That means that he's seen 9 prime ministers and 12 elections. But here's the thing, in all that time, the British public have never actually voted for him to be there. Welcome to the manor of the Earl of Sailboard. Hello. This is John Palmer, but officially he's called the Earl of Sailboard. He's part of the British nobility who have inherited their elite names and privileges over hundreds of years. Now he's aged 79 and he spends most of his time here on his 6,000-acre estate in the south of England, surrounded by his beloved fruit orchards.
We can live with badgers, that's not a problem.
We're looking for a badger poo right now.
This is a badger latrine.
And how much of this land do you own? Or how far does it go out?
Not to the horizon, but it goes about a mile in that direction.
Okay. As a member of the House of Lords, he's been able to have a say on almost every new law that's been brought in, from crime to Brexit, banking, the health service, and even the British Armed Forces. In 1971, your grandfather died, and that's when you then became a hereditary lord. So how does that work?
I had to write to the Clerk of Parliament, and I had to show my birth certificate and the death certificate from my grandfather, and I was duly, therefore, then a member of the Lords.
So what's going on? When people talk about the UK's Houses of Parliament, they're normally talking about the House of Commons. That's where the Prime Minister goes every week to answer questions from other political parties. But Parliament actually has 2 chambers. The other one is the House of Lords, and that's where the Earl of Sailboard is. Members of the House of Lords are often known as peers, and there's almost 800 of them in total. Now you can spot one of these peers a mile off, because they go by these ancient titles like Earl, Baroness, Duke, and Viscount. And out of all 800 of them, none of them have been elected by us, the public. There are 3 main ways you can become a peer in the House of Lords. The most common way is to be appointed as a life peer. Another way to get into the House of Lords is to become a bishop. There are 26 seats reserved especially for the Church of England. And finally, you can get a seat in Parliament just by, well, inheriting it from your parents. And that's how the Earl of Sailboard got in. He's one of 92 hereditary peers who were born into a ruling establishment class and given powerful positions in Parliament.
I've been a hereditary peer by an accident of birth, and I think that I've made a contribution, but I have no case for saying that hereditaries have any more expertise than anyone else.
So if you had been elected at various elections during that time, how would that have changed what you would have spoken about?
Remember, you see, an MP is elected by his constituency, and they are always thinking about the next election. But in the Lords, you're not responding to those immediate pressures. You can take a step back, and you can sometimes promote issues which wouldn't necessarily be very popular for your constituents. But when it comes to the rather boring nitty-gritty of trying to win an election, I'm afraid I've rather lost interest.
Over the years, there have been calls for the House of Lords to be reformed. But is being undemocratic really so bad? And if so, what can be done about it? To find out, we need to dig a little deeper.
If you are writing the laws of the country that you want the citizens to live under, then the citizens should have a say in who you are. I think the hereditary peers have literally had a born-to-rule attitude towards it all. They can only get this job because of the family they were born into, and that's not on any particular thing they've done. It's based on what their forefathers did, which, you know, that's just not the way the world works anymore. So I think that it's a real hangover from a different age.
So, ever since 2002, there have been elections for the hereditary peers. Now, I know what you're thinking. That sounds like great news. At last, the House of Lords is finally democratic, right? Wrong. These elections have a little catch. You can only be a candidate if you're part of the elite aristocracy. All they've got to do is to write a brief personal statement, like it's university or something. That's all they've got to do to get a seat in the House of Lords. And some of those personal statements are, well, see for yourself.
I wish to come and give my support for Brexit. I have been in farming.
This lord wrote,
I wish to inherit a seat as promised in letters patent by the monarch. All my ancestors, on both sides, have served.
and, as if it's not a prerequisite, he adds,
I reside in Westminster and can attend the House of Lords.
This lord said,
Always willing to serve.
Lord Cadman didn't bother to write anything at all. And the Earl of Limerick, for his personal statement, well, you guessed it, he submitted a poem.
The upper house knows none so queer a creature as the seatless peer. Flamingo-like he stands all day, with no support to hold his sway, and waits with covert eagerness for 92 to be one less.
Just to be clear, we haven't made these up. Those people think that submitting those personal statements should be enough to secure them a seat in Parliament for life.
I don't defend the hereditary system. Obviously, you can't defend it logically. But equally, I don't apologise.
Clearly this system is kind of undemocratic. So can we really call the UK a democracy? And for people like the Earl of Sailboard, can he really justify being in Parliament when the public has never voted for him to be there?
No one is seriously suggesting the hereditary should remain, but we will remain there until they make up their mind what they want.
What really angers people about the House of Lords is that it's not just undemocratic, it costs taxpayers loads of money. For one thing, it costs millions just to keep that building up and running. And the place has been plagued by expenses scandals. Most unelected peers can claim up to £305 in expenses every day just for turning up. And a few are given a full salary, complete with chauffeur-driven cars. So I came down to Westminster to meet a peer called Baroness de Souza. She joined the House of Lords in 2004 after being appointed by a committee, and she went on to become the Speaker. I wanted to find out about why the place has a bad reputation. I mean, you yourself have made extravagant expenses claims at times, didn't you?
No.
So when you charged £230 for a chauffeur-driven car to take you to the ballet?
Do you know how many people were in that car at that time?
How many?
5.
But so you stand by that being your own expense?
It was absolutely erroneous. I was meant to have spent £70,000 on flowers. Okay, that was accumulated over 5 years. In the end, it worked out. I spent about £10 a week. And you know, I would have thought that having a bunch of flowers in your room to cheer up distinguished visitors is kind of okay.
Did you need a chauffeur-driven car to take you to the opera?
Yes.
Why did you need a chauffeur-driven car?
Because I had with me a Russian Speaker of the Federation Council whose security required her to drive in a special car.
Even though it was a very short distance?
Absolutely. She doesn't go by public transport, I tell you that. When I went to Windsor for a state dinner, it's quite difficult, believe you me, you're a man, you probably don't know this, to wear a ball gown on public transport on a rainy evening and hope that there'll be a taxi there to take you up through Windsor Park. I do not accept that I was in an expenses scandal. There is so much that was not incurred. I mean, have you looked at the expenses of some other, senior politicians and senior people in various sort of local government? Have you looked at those? Compare that with what...
But this comes down to the idea of they're elected, they're accountable. People can then say, you know what, you misused your expenses, I could vote you out of office. But people like yourself can't be voted in or out of office.
When you say we're not accountable to the public, of course that's right, That said, again, I would argue that much of what the Lords does in terms of bringing up issues which are really alien to the government in the sense they don't want to address it because it's embarrassing or it's a difficult thing, like for instance female genital mutilation, which for years and years and years was off the agenda. The House of Lords put it back on the agenda, amongst others. They really put it back on the agenda.
Now, we should be clear, Baroness de Souza didn't break any rules over her expenses. And she says the House of Lords is essential because of the work it does preparing legislation.
The question is, even though we are a democracy and lots of things about the UK are genuinely democratic, are we democratic enough?
The public doesn't on the whole think a lot about the House of Lords. I mean, when I say doesn't think a lot, they don't spend a lot of time thinking about the House of Lords. It's outside their sphere of interest. However, when it's brought before them, as it is being currently because of the political upheavals we're experiencing, I think they probably think it ought to be a democratically elected House without thinking through what the implications of that are. There was a very good census done not so long ago where the question was, do you think that the House of Lords should be democratically elected? And the answer was 95% yes. And then another question further down on the same census was, do you want more elected politicians? And the answer was no. So I'm not sure that the vast majority of people don't really know what the House of Lords does.
So, is it time to change the House of Lords? Or is the UK democratic enough already?
It's a democracy on paper, but actually for very easy changes, we could make it a much richer and more meaningful and healthier democracy if we were prepared to make the changes that are so obvious to most voters who say these are the sorts of things they'd like to see changed.
So there we go, that's the House of Lords. But obviously that's only one part of the UK's political system. And we're going to do another video asking how democratic is the rest of it. So let us know your thoughts and ideas in the comments below. And let us know if there's anything you'd like us to cover. Thanks for watching, and make sure you hit the subscribe button for more of these videos.